Good evening. Hi. Just as we're getting started tonight, we're going to give it a minute or so before people join us. Just a little bit of a sort of a notice, church notices, things that you don't really miss during lockdown. But for those of you who have been curious about our Sunday mornings, the first Sunday of every month in our morning Skype gathering, we do communion together. And this coming Sunday, being the first Sunday in November, we're going to be doing communion together. And it's just a time for us to remember what Jesus has done for us. But this first Sunday in November, we're going to be having a slightly different format in that we've asked the folks that are kind of our regulars if they would share something from the heart of God, something that God has laid on them or done for them, either testimony or a verse or something that really speaks to them as we have communion together. And I'm really excited about it. It's always lovely to see what God's people, where they're at, what they're discovering, what they're celebrating about who Jesus is. So next Sunday morning, we gather in our Skype session at 11 o'clock. You can find the details of that in the details below this video. You don't have to join Skype. You can come on as a guest, despite the fact the link starts with the word join dot. Don't panic about that. You don't need a Skype or a Microsoft account. And if you're curious, next Sunday morning would be a good Sunday morning to join us. Anyway, back to tonight. There's a phrase which, when I was growing up, I heard a lot amongst evangelical preachers. And it's a phrase which generally was used in terms of how people responded out of faith or trust in their relationship to Jesus. And those preachers would talk about the only division that matters, the only great divide that is of significance ultimately is, what did you do with Jesus? Do you say, yes, I trust you for forgiveness and hope? Or did you decide that you wouldn't trust him? Whether because you simply didn't believe the stories of Jesus, or whether you didn't think that you wanted to put your trust and your faith in him. You didn't want to commit your future to him. But tonight we're going to ask a very similar question, and it's about the same great divide, but it has a much more practical impact on those that are around us. See, the questions of faith are personal. It doesn't matter how much I choose to trust Jesus, it has no direct impact on your personal faith. And it doesn't matter what your opinion of my faith is, it doesn't change my dependency on him if that is the life that I've chosen to live. But there is a question about what you would do with Jesus that has a fundamental impact on how you treat the people around you, and as a result, on how they may or may not benefit from the practical expression of your personal choices about who Jesus is to you. What would you be prepared to do to Jesus? I don't just mean Jesus in his majesty, in his glory, in his power. I'm pretty convinced, and anyone who knows me will know this, that the overwhelming presence of the glory and majesty of God wouldn't leave us with an awful lot of choice as to whether or not we would worship, whether or not we would bow down, whether or not we would obey. Faced with immovable, immutable, omnipotent God, the most implacable opponents of his rule and reign would find themselves cowed into submission. Bless the Lord, by his grace, he has not removed our free will from us by that imminency of his dominion in that way. Rather, it's a question about, what would you do if you encountered Jesus, the homeless refugee child that we'll be thinking about in these next couple of months? What would you do if you encountered Jesus, the youngster in exile who doesn't speak the local language, who's growing up in a foreign land, and his parents are frightened to take him home to his family because of the threat over his life? What would you do if you encountered Jesus playing in the courts of the temple as a teenager? How would you have dealt with Jesus, the homeless preacher, walking around, creating great disturbance because of the crowd that followed him? What would you be prepared to inflict upon? What would you be prepared to withhold from? What would you be prepared to say about or do to that Jesus? You know, one of the most challenging things about the way Jesus speaks is he very rarely qualifies his statements. If Jesus declares that something is a good thing to do, he doesn't say it's mostly a good thing to do. He's very clear. And in fact, it's one of the reasons that I believe there's so much of our theology that you won't find in the recorded statements of Jesus. Because in his recorded statements, he is being absolutely direct. You have to try very hard to be confused about what he says. You certainly have to try very hard if you wish to suggest that it has shades of meaning that give you leeway to pretend that, well, perhaps I don't really interpret it that way. Tonight, we're going to have a look at one of the simplest, starkest statements Jesus makes. We're going to read the verses around it, and they give us some context, and some of it is speaking of great dispensational truth. And those are things where we could have perhaps a theological discussion, but at the heart of what we're about to read is a statement which doesn't allow us any leeway. It doesn't allow us the excuse of saying, well, it's a bit too complicated, Jesus. There's a statement about the way Jesus assesses how we treat people. Statement about the way Jesus assesses how we behave towards those over whom we thought we had authority, or in whose lives we believed we did not have responsibility. We're going to read it now. You can find our verses in Matthew 25. We're going to read verses 31 to 40. Those of you who know this passage will spot that I'm stopping at the end of what Jesus says to those who've done a good job. He then goes on and has the same conversation with those who haven't done such a good job, and the consequences are terrifying. But to get the core statement, the thing that is the most important, actually the simplest truth that Jesus articulates here, because he repeats it in both sections, we're just going to read the first section because it's always good to focus on the positive and the hopeful. It says Matthew 25, starting at verse 31, and I'm reading from the New King James. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate them one from another as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." Whatever you did to the least of these, that these he's speaking about are the nations. It's the entirety of humanity that has ever lived, ever breathed, ever hoped, ever feared. From the very beginning of time to the moment God finally wraps it up, all creation is there before him. And Jesus declares, whatever you did to the least of these, whatever you did to those who were powerless, whatever you did to those who seemed insignificant, whatever you did to those who seemed undeserving, By whatever standard your human wisdom would assess someone to be the least, the most worthless, the one with the least merit or the least claim, the one who could easily be ignored or easily be swept aside, the one who did not deserve priority because there were others who were nobler, stronger, bolder, had tried harder, were of better character. Jesus doesn't say whatever you did to the most deserving of these. You know, there's a phrase that is common in modern conversations about charity, and people who know me know what my opinion of charity is. But it's a phrase that speaks about social justice. I want to tell you tonight that I don't believe in justice as a social good, because mercy triumphs over judgment. You see, I don't want to get what I deserve. I don't want justice. I don't live a life in which I say, well, it's unreasonable for me to live this way. It's unfair for me to have these advantages. I want every single one of them. I enjoy the comfort of my home. I enjoy the wealth, the relative wealth at least that I have. I enjoy the good company and the safe environment and the peaceable nation that I live in. But justice, I don't want justice. I don't want to get what my fickle temperament deserves. I don't want to get what my desire to put my feet up at the end of a short working day deserves. I don't want to get what my behavior, what my cutting of corners deserve. I don't want justice for me. So God forbid that I should want to inflict some standard of justice on others. You know, the sinister flip side of the Protestant work ethic is that we've created this idea of some who are deserving and some who are not. And these days, people don't like to use the phrase deserving poor because it reveals an element of their own character, which is pretty unpleasant. But Jesus doesn't say whatever you did to the most deserving of these. In fact, he counts amongst these people those who are imprisoned. He doesn't say whatever you did to the falsely imprisoned. He doesn't say whatever you did to the naked because, well, they'd had everything stolen from them. He doesn't say what you did to the hungry because they found themselves in times of famine and desperate need and they had been driven out of employment and opportunity. None of that. These are unqualified statements of human needs: companionship, refuge, shelter, clothing, food. Whatever you did to the least of these, he says, you're being judged on the basis that what you did to them, you did to and for me. How are you doing with answering that question? What would you be prepared to do to Jesus? What would you be prepared to withhold from him? You see, when we think about Jesus, particularly those of us who have some sort of faith in Jesus Christ, or even just a religious opinion about his teaching, we think about someone in whom there is no fault, someone who does not deserve to suffer, someone who does not deserve punishment or sanction or imprisonment or to be tortured and treated in the way that he was. We believe that when he went to the cross, he did it not for what he had done, because there was no sin in him. Even people who don't acknowledge his divinity acknowledge that no person has ever spoken with the compassion and the mercy and the wisdom of Jesus Christ. No one has ever behaved with such restraint and kindness. And so when we think about Jesus, naturally we think about one who is lovely, one who is wonderful, one who is deserving. And yet Jesus does not say whatever you did for the deserving among these. What would you be prepared to inflict upon Jesus? Would you be prepared to see him starving, him persecuted, him driven out and excluded from opportunity? Would you be prepared to see him homeless, freezing and cold? Would you be prepared to see him naked and destitute? Would you be comfortable to see him imprisoned and without help, without company, without anyone being prepared to take up his cause? Would you be prepared to see him suffering at the hands of a system which benefited you because you did not want to risk your own comfort? You see the part that I haven't gone on to read. He speaks to those who did not meet the needs of the least of these. Those who said, well, perhaps they don't deserve it. Or perhaps those amongst whom I would distribute clothing, food, shelter, there might be some who take advantage. Those who said, well, if they're in prison, they deserve it. Or if they're destitute, they're too lazy. Those who, those who held on, gripped tightly what they felt they had somehow earned, and were merciless in their application of their own perception of social justice. You see, when they say to him, but when did we ever abandon you? When did we ever ignore your poverty, your hunger, your nakedness, your imprisonment? Jesus repeats the same clear, unqualified statement. Whatever you did, by action or omission, to the least of these, you did it to me. You know, at this point, there's always a great risk for preachers that we begin to take the word of God and try and apply it to contemporary settings, particular circumstances, things that are on our heart, or areas where we particularly are personally being challenged by the word, and we try and put that challenge out there as though it's for someone else. So I'm not going to try to take this and contextualize it. I don't need to. The Spirit of God can show you areas in your life where the answer to that question, what would you be prepared to do to Jesus, might be a little less comfortable, a little less convenient than you would like. Let's make no doubt about it. One day there will be a great divide. One day there will be a line drawn. And the question of faith is the overarching question, the question that matters more than anything else, because by faith in Jesus, there is forgiveness for every failure, for every sin. There is great mercy with God when we trust him. But trusting Jesus to show us mercy places us in that position where we ourselves must be merciful. Because in the same measure we hand it out, it's coming right back to us, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. Jesus, after all, declares, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And so tonight, for those who disagree with you and those who don't hold the same opinions, for those who appear to be living in a mess entirely of their own making, for those that you consider deserve entirely what they are suffering, The standard that Jesus applies is whatever you do to them, you're doing it to me. Stood before God one day. I'm so grateful there is mercy, because so often I get trapped in the sense of my own entitlement and the fear that my circumstances might somehow diminish. In those moments of clarity, when I read his word without trying to add to it my own get outs, to negotiate my own easing of my conscience, when I read it in the simplicity in which he spoke it, then my heart's intention and my only prayer must be, Jesus, let me see people. Let me react to their needs and to their circumstances with that clear vision that however I treat them, whatever ethnos, whatever group, whatever identity they might have, however I treat them, Jesus, I treat them in the way I would want to be treating you. God bless. Have a great week. Don't forget, you can find details of how to get in touch with us at the bottom. If you're not doing anything else next Sunday morning, we would love you to join us for communion. Unfortunately, for kind of privacy reasons, we don't record the whole of our Sunday morning gatherings. We literally just record the talk, and you can only catch that up for 30 days afterwards. But if you'd like to join us, then I'll make sure the details are below this video over the next couple of hours, and you'll be able to click and find your way through that. And we would love you to be with us for next Sunday morning as we head into November with that special service. God bless. Have an amazing week. Take care.